So with all the recent Shenmue news the past 2 months or so, and then a bunch of Switch stuff coming out, and I've had lots of little, Switch possible news videos coming out, and the Direct come here pretty soon, tomorrow actually, as the time I'm recording this. With all that going on, plus a busy summer with both work and then lots of fun day trips, which I'll link in the description below. We actually did a couple videos for some fun day trips this summer, and just a heck of a lot going on. I actually didn't get to talk about one of the games that I played this summer. I actually finished another RPG and another one off of the bucket list. And that is Tales of Vesperia, which I have played part of before, but never went back and finished. And it's actually an interesting story because it ties to the 2 times that I've owned an Xbox 360. I actually got the 360 and Tales of Vesperia right around the time Vesperia released. I got that and a couple other games, and I played a good portion of it and some other games, but then within about a week and a half of getting my 360, Red Ring of Death, and it also happened to hit around a point where I was really getting started with college and thinking about career choices and things like that, and with that completely sudden, unreliable, I already don't have much of a love for Microsoft in general, and that just that moment I just said, screw it, I'm gonna use money for other stuff, more important things. And I got rid of the 360, and the games that I got, I didn't lose much money. I saw it more as like a rental, and the games that I did get to play in that time period. So I enjoyed what I had played, but I never went back to it, never owned a 360 again until about, I don't know, 2 years ago, I guess it was, maybe 2.5 at this point. I got a 360 finally, and a couple games. Eventually I decided, I did want one. There were some exclusives at the time, and a couple multiplats where I don't know how much I've talked about before on the channel, but I love the PS1 and PS2, like obsessively. Those are easily my largest gaming collections. I'm really enjoying the PS4 so far. We got this past summer. I've never liked the PS3, just as a console. There are some great exclusive games on there, definitely, but just as a console, I never liked it. So I really wanted to get a 360 and a couple multiplats. I wanted that version instead of the PS3, and then a couple exclusives in North America, which would include, until this definitive edition comes out, Tales of Vesperia. So I grabbed that, and I finally knocked it off my bucket list this past summer after I beat Lost Odyssey, which go check that video out. I talked about my experience with that and how much I loved that. And this was another surprise and another 360 game that I thought I was going to enjoy, but I enjoyed much more than I was initially assuming, as one that was a bit surprising. I knew just from what I'd played before that I was going to like it. I already knew going in. But I hadn't quite played far enough to really get the full range of the experience. Tales of Vesperia I enjoyed to the point where I would say it is my second favorite game in the series behind Abyss, which is not what I expected. There are some elements of it that don't quite live up to a couple Tales games that would be right behind it in a list of favorites, but there are some aspects that actually come close to challenging Abyss. And a couple of those I'll talk about first here. This might have the most well-rounded cast of characters I've ever played in a Tales game, because even in something like Abyss, there might be 1 or 2 characters that I don't like quite as much as my personal favorites, and maybe there's 1 or 2 little aspects of their storyline which I thought could need tweaking, that type of thing, and then to a greater extent in some other games like Symphonia, where there are some characters I just can't stand, and same thing in any other games, even Legendia. I feel like there's a handful of issues there where there's some characters I really love, some things I don't, and that ties into the way the story plays out as well, because every character in this I found enjoyable. There wasn't a single character that I disliked or found annoying. There wasn't a single character that I felt lacked purpose or didn't add to the overall story. In some cases with Tales game, there might be a character who you take that character out and it might change the day-to-day dynamics of the adventure, but the overall plot, it wouldn't really do that much to it. Here, I felt like everyone had their place, and everyone's individual story arc outside the larger picture, just focusing on the individual character, really worked well and meshed well with everyone else. And everyone has these interesting personality quirks that aren't overly gimmicky. They aren't, quirky to the point of being cartoonish. They just kind of add a little bit more to the character, and they play off each other very well. I think this was one of the most enjoyable experiences as far as just the the conversations between characters, the little things as you're going along outside of the main story beats, I think really worked well, and I really wanted to pay attention to them. I think they added a heck of a lot. And the character of Rapide is one that I'd like to mention, just because that's a character who could have been just the goofy animal sidekick. It could have been, again, that cartoonishness that I was talking about, the goofiness, and it absolutely never went that direction. And also, Yuri is a character that I think could have been, if you look at just the general plot outline and some elements of his personality, he could have been an incredibly generic protagonist. He could have been written as being a little more broody and angsty, and I think in some cases some different series would take that route, and even in some instances this series could take that route with a character of his type. But instead he's very sarcastic and jokey and just enjoyable in so many ways, and there's so many different elements to his character that play off each other. You have that reaction, and then the very serious moments, and it can really get deep and thoughtful and dark and almost sinister at times, depending on what the scenario is going on. But then underneath that, he really is a huge heart. He really is the biggest sweetheart underneath his sarcastic, cavalier attitude. And he works well with everyone in the main cast, and I think the favorite relationship I have, though, of course, is with Yuri and Flynn. And I think the writing did a fantastic job utilizing those two characters to show how two people that are very similar in many ways and have many of the same goals can still be different enough in how they approach those goals and how they view the world, that even though they have these similarities and their end goal is largely the same to a certain extent throughout the story, you can really see how there are two sides to the coin, and neither is 100% wrong or 100% right at any time. And it really, I think, plays to a dynamic that is very prevalent now, particularly if you live somewhere, in the US, everyone is so extreme on one side or the other of everything, whether it's, a deep political issue or something like a movie. People are so extreme to the point where someone with a slightly different, opinion than you is a monster. And I think the writing in here really showed how that's typically not true, that it's shades of gray, and just different perspectives of the same issue can eventually come together to really solve that issue, even though they approached it from different ways. And I think it did a very good job within the story, playing out that dynamic and really making those characters both very enjoyable. And no matter who the character is throughout the story, you can really empathize with where they're coming from when different problems arise. It really, without spoiling anything, it's one of my major things here, just a general kind of casual talk about it. You can really feel a connection with each of the characters in as far as their logic regarding the scenario. Even if you completely disagree with the character's approach, you can kind of see where they're coming from. And with such a large cast of main and secondary characters, to be able to accomplish that pretty evenly throughout everyone is a pretty impressive feat for something that could have ended up being very generic JRPG. It definitely had the potential to be that, but never came to that aspect. And while the story in many ways turns into a save the world, JRPG scenario, there's so much in the building blocks to that larger story that does not sync to that level in any way, that it actually builds up the whole thing story-wise. That is fantastic. Sound-wise, this might be my second favorite soundtrack overall behind Legendia. It's pretty close with Abyss for second place, so pretty tied in there. Abyss has a few tracks that I like better than anything in Vesperia, but the overall sound design, both as far as the music and just different sounds throughout the game, and then the voice acting, is pretty close to my second place. It might have one of the most consistently good voice casts that I've heard for the English language version of a Tales game. Gameplay-wise, the only issues that I had with it are personal taste issues, not quality issues. I think it was absolutely fantastic and evolved many things from previous Tales games up to that point. But at the same time, I'm much more of a fan of combat in slightly older Tales games, where things are a little bit more of a linear plane. That's just, to me, it reminds me a little bit more of a fighting game in many ways, and I just kind of like that a little bit better, but that's just personal taste, not a quality issue thing there. The other thing is that I feel like as Tales games have evolved to give you more and more camera control in environments, I think we've lost a little bit of the ability to really create beautiful cinematic camera moments, and sometimes the cutscenes don't even quite accomplish that in this game. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but I feel like in some cases, the more control you start giving people, and as far as how they interact with their environment, gives the creator a little bit less control, and you can create, there's a little bit less of a chance for artistic direction. And that's just a very minor thing. I don't think it really, I don't think this game suffered from in that element at all. Just something I wanted to mention because I felt like there was a little more potential there to take a little more creative control and take a little more visual control from the player to actually enhance the game visually and bring out some of those environments. And as far as the environments are concerned, I feel like, especially dungeon-wise, I really enjoyed the layout of everything and the look of everything. Artistically and graphically, it looks fantastic. I just don't feel like there were quite as memorable locations. Thinking back now, because I actually beat it a couple months ago at this point, about 2.5, almost 3 months ago, and there aren't as many locations that just off the top of my head I remember, the names and all the details and just have a lot of memories attached to that location as compared to something like Abyss. And it's really more of, did a major story moment happen at that location that really sticks out in my mind? Then I really remember it. But other than that, if it's something I was lesser or something that I didn't spend quite as much time in, it really doesn't stick out quite as much. And that's, again, I think more of just personal aesthetic not quite living up to a couple of the other Tales games, but in no way a fault yet again. I keep saying that there's very little that I can really fault this game with. There's very few things that I feel were negative in any respect. Anything that I didn't find to be phenomenal was just a personal taste thing, where I found something to be good, not phenomenal. So yeah, an absolutely amazing game, the point where I am definitely getting the definitive edition on the Switch, and that's actually one of the reasons why I was playing it through the summer. I was already starting to play through, and then E3 happened. I'm like, alright, I'm definitely finishing this to see if I want to get that Switch version with all the extras that were in the PS3 version in Japan and things like that. And yeah, I definitely do. It ends up being my second favorite Tales game ever. So that was another game that I've been playing lately, and then of course I went on to playing Shenmue 1 and 2, and with Torna coming out pretty soon, I went back to my New Game Plus to the very last save point right before the final boss, and went back and started doing any quests and anything that I hadn't done before, leading up to Torna, and then all the different expansion content and stuff that's going to come along with that. I didn't get the expansion pass or anything. I've been waiting for some sort of collection like this, some sort of like get it all at once type thing at the end, which is what I'm going to be doing. Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. In a note about Xenoblade, very infrequently do I spend, even on a big RPG, anywhere near the 100-hour mark. There are very few games where I do that. I just don't have the time for that. I'd only play 2 or 3 games a year if I did that constantly. But the Xenoblade Chronicles games, and heck, even Gears and Saga and stuff, those are all exceptions where I've spent hundreds of hours. And yeah, definitely don't feel the need to 100% Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but I'll be getting all the rare blades and trying to go through most of their individual storylines, especially ones that I really enjoy, and leading up to Torna, which looks amazing. So got a little sidetracked there at the end. This is about Vesperia, not Xenoblade, but everything's about Xenoblade to some extent in my mind. Anyway, I will see you guys later.